What's up, guys? This is Braden here from Robo 3D. We're doing all sorts of crazy stuff with 3D printing. You are watching the Fargo 3D Printing Show.
Hey everyone, welcome to the Fargo 3D Printing Show. Jake Clark, John Schneider. Went to CES last week. It was a fun week. We had our entire team out there and we had a blast. It was a little cold for Vegas.
So to give you a weather update, so when we left Vegas, it was 50 degrees Fahrenheit, and when we came back to Fargo, it was, what, 15 degrees below zero? About, yeah. So it was a little bit of a temperature swing.
A little chilly. Yeah. I was excited because that means that I could actually not be sweating while we're walking to CES. Because we stayed at Circus, so we had a little bit of a jaunt, about a half a mile each day to it. And then I know you walked down all the way down to New York, which was about a 3-mile walk.
Once I got to where I was going, it was about a 4-mile walk Saturday morning.
No, thank you. So what we're going to be covering today is CES, all the different machines that we saw out there. We're going to touch on our most exciting printer that we saw, as well as the coolest booth, in our opinion. And then we're going to talk a little bit about some of the other stuff that's not 3D printed related in the other halls. So start out CES, we got there Wednesday. It started Wednesday. We spent 2 days alone in the 3D printing section. I know, Eric, we're going to have some other interviews. Eric and John did some interviews out there, so we're going to have a whole playlist of those coming up. Yeah. So you guys can watch that. MakerBot, we cornered the MakerBot CEO. And talked about some of their stuff. So let's start out. So the first person that we really talked to was Formlabs with their Form 2, which we've seen kind of in action, but we never saw the startup process.
Right. So the Form 2, it's a printer that's already out. It's in very high demand right now. So they've been saying that shipping, there's a delay of anywhere from 2 to 4 weeks from when you order it to when it starts to ship. But yeah, like Jake mentioned, the one thing we hadn't seen was how the printer starts up, how it first starts filling its resin reservoir. So there's a cartridge. It's basically almost like a quart of oil type thing, where it gets flipped upside down. You press it down into the back of the printer, and then it starts automatically loading that into the resin tray. And as it starts the print, it actually is heating up the resin. So one of the key things that they changed in the Form 2 over the Form 1 and the Form 1 Plus is they're trying to temperature control the resin so that you have more consistent results. So whether the printer's out in a garage or whether it is in the top story of a building in the summer, that the temperature is consistent. I believe they heat it to 30 degrees C. So one of the really cool things about that cartridge system is if you're printing something that's using a lot of resin, you can actually swap out the cartridges as the printer is printing, so it'll automatically fill that reservoir as needed. So if you are starting to run really low, you can pull the empty cartridge out, put a fresh cartridge in, it'll start refilling that reservoir, all without stopping or pausing the print. So it'll keeping that print process going.
Lead time, I don't know what you said, but the lead time it's giving on the website is 12 weeks.
Yeah, and the reason it's different on the website is the website's a little more pessimistic. We talked to the sales guy. They'd rather underpromise and overdeliver on that lead time than they would say it's going to be ready in a week and it ends up taking 4 weeks. So kind of think that 2 to 4 week range. And Formlabs, if they end up correcting you, they're going to have the right amount. Yeah. You contact Formlabs, they're the ones that are shipping it out. So if they say it's going to be 12 weeks, all right, it's probably going to be 12 weeks. So the Form
and we
Labs,
saw some really cool parts from that. The SLA DLP kind of sector. I'm gonna kind of combine those two because I know we looked at XYZ a little bit with their new stuff, and that whole realm was very well represented this CES.
I think there were probably half a dozen machines from different brands that were trying to attack that desktop SLA market. I still think Formlabs is doing the best job because print quality from some of the machines that we saw was very, the prints were workable, but they weren't anything to get excited about. It wasn't terribly consistent.
Yeah, DWS Labs was, we talked about them last year. They're an interesting one. But that's only UK based right now, and it's kind of a little bit of a newer one. So think of DWS Labs kind of in Formlabs shoes when they had their Form 1. It's kind of like their time frame, right where they're at in their kind of business infancy.
Yeah. So the XFAB is that printer, that smaller one.
Yes.
It's around that $5,000 price point.
So.
It's a very capable printer. It can work with multiple materials, not at the same time, but you can have different types of materials that you can swap in and swap out. The ones the printers that we saw a lot of were Chinese-based DLP and SLA printers. So XYZprinting, they had 2 machines in the desktop range. I believe
their Noble. Their Noble is coming out in Q1. I think is what they're saying.
It's somewhere in there because XYZprinting has a standard SLA where it uses a UV laser and very similar to the Formlabs systems where it traces the image, but they also have a DLP based
and that one's not coming out till Q3, Q4.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
And then their new one that is CJP isn't going to be shipping until 2017. So that wasn't even running at the show. It just had an empty shell that said, "Do not touch me."
Yep.
So I'm sure people walked up and tried to open it and see that it was an empty shell.
And XYZprinting also had a multi-jet printer there. So very
and
similar.
that wasn't running either.
That also wasn't running. And they're saying for both of those more industrial grade machines,
2017.
Yeah, the guy said maybe late 2016, but it's manufacturing. I mean, we know how that stuff goes. It's going to be early 2017.
I mean, look at 3D Systems and kind of how their timeline has changed. But that's a whole different story.
And we can get into that a little bit more because they're starting to take a more realistic take on their launch goals.
Let's step back to XYZ a little bit and just size-wise of their CJP and MJP machine. I can't remember which one was actually sitting on the table. Was that their
That was the MJP.
That was the MJP. So it was about, I don't know, maybe about 3 feet wide.
Yeah.
By 2.5 feet tall.
Yeah.
And about 2 feet deep maybe.
Yeah.
So pretty decent size, about the size of a mini fridge on its side. Then you looked at their CJP machine, which was about the size of a probably like 2. If you had 2 mini fridges next to each other, it was about that size because they were sitting on the floor. They had casters on it. Is that roughly about the size of the machine?
Yeah, and I mean, I didn't look as closely at it as you did, so that size sounds about right. I mean, it's something that they want to be able to fit into an office setting without, without too much of it getting in the way. Now, what it's going to sound like when it's running, we just don't know.
To be determined.
It could be loud, could be.
And we don't know what the material cost is, and if it's proprietary materials as well. So we don't know that yet, but we'll see that here later this year, how that kind of comes to reality. So Formlabs, LulzBot, our friends over at LulzBot was there. So talked to them. They had ColorFabb and, almost dropped my phone, ColorFabb and who's the other one in their booth? OpenBionics?
They had OpenBCI.
Yes.
So BCI, brain control interface, really cool project where they're partnering with LulzBot. LulzBot's going to be printing the hat. I know it's not called a hat, but I can't remember what it's actually called. But think of it like almost like a helmet that you put on your head, and you're able to. It has a modular design, so you can put the different electrodes in different spots. So if you want to focus on just one particular area of the brain and get the brain waves from that, so you can analyze it, you can do that. Or if you want to have it more spread out, so it's not as detailed in one spot, but you get an overall view of what's going on in the brain, you can do that too. Red Hat was also there, focusing on, I believe it's the Fedora build of Linux.
I think he actually had a Red Hat, didn't he?
Yeah. I mean, it's a thing. Like people that are proponents for that open source, that version of Linux, Red Hat, and they have the red Fedora. So I mean, it makes sense because it's Fedora. That's that version of Linux. But I mean, everything seemed to be running well there. It's cool seeing LulzBot partnering with the different companies.
Yeah, and they actually had, that OpenBCI actually had Shaq wear their device while he was on like NBA Live from CES or whatever. So It was really interesting because then afterwards we told Sarah and her boyfriend like, hey, Shaq's here. And so we all just gathered at the LulzBot booth waiting to see if we could get a glimpse of Shaq coming over there and looking at 3D printers, but we had somewhere else to be that we weren't able to kind of hang out and see.
So we didn't see him. The benefit is we know we didn't almost miss him because if he was there and we were there at the same time, you would have been able, he's a tall guy. I mean, he's taller than we are by about a foot and a half.
Healthy amount.
I'd say.
Yeah.
So LulzBot in their booth, they were from the LulzBot side of things, they were showing off their dual extruder V2. So we thought they were going to have the new version of the LulzBot Taz there, but because of where they are in their production timeline, they didn't want to announce it quite yet, since there's going to be a bit of a delay, or not a delay in their production, but it's not going to start shipping until March. So they didn't want to announce it now and then have that delay between the announcement and the ship date. Where last year they really unveiled the the LulzBot Mini at CES. I mean, they really pushed it hard at CES, and then they were launching it that month. So there was, it was a better connected launch, and that's what they're trying to go with for the new Taz. So I think at 3D printing, inside 3D Printing Expo in New York, they'll probably have it there and make a bigger push.
Maybe. I'm not going to be going, and we're not going to be exhibiting either. I don't know what your plans are, but I don't think we have plans to actually be at that show.
Not at the moment, no.
Because that's not until April, because Rising Media took it over instead of Meckler Media, since Meckler is getting liquidated. So we don't have plans to be there as of yet in April. And then I think their Santa Clara one's getting changed to San Diego instead of October 18th or something. I just looked, it's going to be in December 13th or 14th. So I don't know if we have plans to go to that yet, but
that's still a ways off.
Yeah.
But the dual extruder was working great. They also released a new version of Kira LulzBot edition. So now that dual extruder, you won't need to mess around with stuff in Slicer or Simplify 3D to get the dual extruder working nicely. They have that all baked into the newest version of Kira. So they're really trying to make this user-friendly. With V1 of the dual extruder, they said, hey, this is for advanced users, people that really want to experiment. Now with version 2, they're saying, hey, this is going to, so version 2 is the consumer-ready version. I mean, it's still going to take a little more messing around with than just the standard single extruder, but it's going to be much more straightforward to get set up and much easier to switch between firmwares from the single extruder to the dual extruder.
While you were talking with Natasha and some of the other folks there, because I wasn't there, did they mention anything about their Dually Flexi at all? Because I know we've had some people asking about that.
I think they said that's going to launch a month after the standard dual extruder, or somewhere. It's not going to launch at exactly the same time, or they're launching it at the same time, but it won't be shipping. It's going to ship about a month later than the standard V2 dual extruder. So
there you go, rough estimate of when the Dually Flexi, because I know there's been a couple people out in forums and asking us questions about when that's going to come back out. Cooper's actually been taking advantage of the older version of the Dually Flexi with his prosthetic company. He's actually down in Haiti right now, delivering one of his prosthetic arms. So maybe when he gets back, we should talk to him to see how the Dually Flexi's been doing.
Absolutely.
So after LulzBot, we kind of went over and talked with Robo3D. They had a really nice booth. They had a wall of 3D printers going. They had a display of their kind of Best Buy retail setup. They had a 3D printed track with RC cars that were 3D printed. That they said, I forget exactly what the number of hours was that it took to print, but it was substantial. The track. Yeah, the track. The track. Yeah, so I mean, this was a full-on 12-inch wide track that was multi-leveled. It was more than just your standard figure eight. I mean, it was essentially a figure eight, but just way cooler. It was 3D printed. Yeah. So they had that, and then they also had their new R2. I don't know, I just thought of Star Wars. They had their Robo3D R2 there, which they debuted. We saw it running. It looked really nice. It looked very clean. Yes, very clean, very nice. It's something that, how you have that Cube Pro is kind of going for that Apple-esque look. This is kind of along the same lines as far as the Apple-esque look. Right. Think of it almost more like a rounded Ultimaker. I mean, it has a lot of it has a similar gantry system to that, where the original R1, I think it had more of a Mendel style gantry, where just the x-axis went back and forth. The y-axis was the bed, and then so the gantry was the x and the z-axis. The bed was the y-axis, and this new one, the x and y-axis are now in the gantry, and the z-axis is the bed. But it's a really nice looking printer. It looks like they're going to have two different sizes. I don't know if they're going to call it two different things. Jake, you have it pulled up right now. It's just R2 and R2 Mini. Oh yeah, there you go. The R2 and the R2 Mini. So I mean,
It's looking really nice.
I'm not sure if they're using an E3D hot end or not. I know that's one thing we talked about when we saw it.
It looked like they were using, if not exactly an E3D hexagon hot end. It was very close, very similar to it. Maybe a modified, specialized version for them.
Modified or custom.
Yeah. So E3D, that's something that we want to dig into at a future date as well, because they seem to be very good at producing hot ends and seem to be supplying a lot of the different 3D printer manufacturers out there. LulzBot is another great example.
Yep, the LulzBot Mini. And their TAS 5, I believe. Or their TAS 6, excuse me.
Well, yeah,
I think it's a modified one.
All of their all-metal hot ends are from E3D, or at least it's a variant of it.
So a couple things. If you've used a E3D hot end or have questions about them, send those in so that we can kind of gather those questions for when we do that podcast. So send those in, comment down below, shoot us an email. So Robo 3D, like John said, really clean looking machine. This is going to be something that's exciting because they were one of the successful Kickstarters. That came out of this, out of the whole Kickstarter realm. And so it's going to be interesting to see how this machine compares to their R1, because I know a lot of people that have R1s like the R1s. A little bit of tinkering, but so it goes. So it's going to be interesting to see where this machine really goes and fits in with their lineup.
And we do have an interview with one of the guys at Robo 3D. I think I asked him a question about the whole Kickstarter process, specifically asking him, hey, how are you that successful? How are you one of the successful ones? What are some of the other Kickstarters not doing right, I guess?
Well,
I don't know if there is a right way to do it, but there's definitely a
little
wrong
bit of
way.
luck.
There's definitely a wrong way to do it. Yeah. No, I mean, that's been a common theme when we've talked to all the different 3D printing startups that have started up in the last 5 to 6 years. What do they attribute some of their success to? And a lot of it has been luck. I mean, yeah, it's just timing, getting lucky with their timing. So that's, in this environment, that's something that's really tough to replicate. So 3D Systems.
Replicate.
So 3D Systems was one of the other things, one of the other really nice booths that we saw.
So go ahead.
So 3D Systems, they had a big booth last year. They also had a large booth again this year. I think they've had a large booth for quite a few years now. Mm-hmm. But what's changed is kind of their focus in their booth. So last year they had a ton of different products all going at the same time.
Well, they had different segments too, as far as they had education there. They had some people from education. They had some people from food. They had some people from, I think not VR, but kind of their design software.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was very scattered.
And this year, there's still a lot of different things going on in their booth, but it felt like they were starting to distill down what they're doing. It felt like it had more focus. When we talked to the product manager for the CubeJet, for example, the CubeJet is a product that was announced at CES 2014. So that was announced 2 years ago, and that's something that's been pretty consistently behind schedule. But now it's in internal beta. They actually had units running at the show this year. Last year it was just an empty mock-up shell. So this year, seeing it actually up and running, that's a big difference from the 3D Systems.
Well, yeah, it makes or breaks some of the resellers' confidence and maybe even some of the investors' confidence in the company. But one of the neat things that I noticed with the CJP machine versus kind of like the 310 Plus that we have, help me out with
Z Corp. It's
Z Corp 310 Plus.
It's also a CJP machine.
Well, it's about a 2009, 2008. But what you see with that kind of machine was you had two different two different boxes. One was a feed, one was a build. And the build would drop, the feed would raise, an arm would come over, or a little roller would come and push the material over flat. Then it would build over here and drop down and lift up. What this one actually had was interesting, was it had a build box. And then there's a roller, there's a little head that just went over the build box. And when it would come back over there, I guess there's a little section where it would actually deposit up above. It would actually have this roller and conveying system where it deposit just enough powder to make another layer. And then when it pushed it over, the bottom was open on all three sides where all the powder could actually go down and be conveyed back up. So it was a very interesting concept and idea of how to do a CJP machine versus what we've seen on some of the other machines that they currently have and the one we have in-house.
Right. So a little bit more on the kind of on their production schedule for this. So it's in internal beta right now. The product manager that we spoke with, she has 4 of them running in her office pretty much constantly. Still getting some kinks worked out. She said right now the builds are at about a 90% success rate, so they're working on bringing that up. In the next quarter or so, they're gonna invite external users to take part in that beta, and then possibly at the end of this year they'll start production and start shipping. Price point has changed a little bit. When it was first announced, it was at that $5,000
Sub
price
5,000
point.
it said.
$49.95, and now it's going to be at like that, I think the $8,000 to $9,000 range. But you're still going to want to have the post processing, the different cleanup stations. But which cleanup stations you want are going to depend on how much you want to post process it. Whether you want a wax dipping chamber, or whether you want to be just putting it in a, I don't know, whatever that other hardening agent is.
It's just like
almost like a super glue.
It's like a super glue. It just penetrates it. It's an infiltrant, and then it only goes down maybe 200 microns, 300, 400 microns into the part. Yeah, because that's my experience that I've had with our machine is the infiltrant doesn't go very far into it, and then if you have something that's hollow, for instance, this root thing that we'll get to, there'd be powder in here, and you could just dump out all the powder. But if there was a top here for whatever reason, this would still be solid powder, and you'd have to drill a hole somewhere and shake out all the powder that's loose. But the infiltrant would only go down about 200 to 400 microns, depending on, and the parts would still be pretty brittle in my opinion, compared to an FDM print or an SLA or an SLS. But it'll be interesting to see what kind of infiltrants they have for this. Yeah.
But turnkey, I think she said it's going to be, it's going to be in that 10,000 range,
10 to 15.
Yeah, plus or minus. It's just depending on
plus
how you have it. How you have it equipped. The other new product that they had was the ProJet 2500. So this was, if you're not already familiar with the 3D Systems ProJet line, this is their multi-jet printer, where it's like an inkjet head that goes over the top, sprays the tiny droplets of liquid plastic, and then when the UV light hits it, it cures. So what's different about the 2500 is instead of spraying it all in one large band, it has about a 2-inch wide band, so it needs to do multiple passes. But it allows it to have a smaller footprint. It allows it to have a much lower price point. I think they're talking, and keep in mind the numbers that we're saying for pricing, it hasn't been officially announced yet, so take it all with a little bit of a grain of salt. It could vary. It could definitely vary between now and the launch date.
Between then and there.
But around that $50,000 price point is what they're thinking. But it looks like a very office-friendly unit. It's not like the double refrigerator that you saw with the ProJet 3500 or the ProJet 3600. The ProJet 3600 is also
the 5500, which is the size of a freaking cooler.
Yeah. The 5500. The 5500 is wider, but it's not quite as deep as the 3500, because the 3500 it moves the whole build chamber.
It's about probably 3/4 deep as that.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not as deep.
Still big, not quite as office friendly.
Yeah, no.
Unless you have a really big office, then.
And it's interesting to see kind of their design concept, or their how the printers actually look, because they actually kind of are going back to an older style of what some of these machines used to look like back in the early, I don't even know, maybe 90s or 2000s. I can't remember, where it has the glass that actually comes over the front. Where it's kind of a little bit of an older style. Eric, I'll find you the picture that I'm really talking about, because you can see this in some older CJP machines where it has the glass that comes down in the front and has the bend in it. So it's interesting to see that they're going back to that style. I'm not sure why, but it's interesting. So is there anything else that you saw? They didn't have any of their chef jets there this year, or the Coco Jet, am I correct?
No,
I know they didn't have the Coco.
So the Coco Jet, one of us, it wasn't me, but one of us asked them specifically about that, and they said, oh, well, it might be at the Hershey's place.
Was it you, Eric?
Yeah, so I'm sure that's getting tied up in just regulation stuff. I'm sure it's the same thing with the Chef Jet, because we asked, when's this going to be out, and they said they didn't have a date nailed down, which is different than they were saying last year. Last year at this time, they said it would be launched Q3, Q4 of 2015. Well, that time has come and gone, and they still don't have a date nailed down. It seems like they're just, until they have a really hard date, they're avoiding announcing it,
Well,
which I think is smart.
It could be also where they're like, okay, yeah, cool, we can print in chocolate, but what's the application? Maybe that's one of the things that they're having internally. Yeah, we can do it, but yeah, we can do it.
Yeah.
So maybe let's focus on some of the other stuff, because we talked to the Cube Pro project manager as well.
Yep.
And heard some really, really interesting stuff from him. So he's actually working a lot on the advanced software side right now.
Yeah, which is very comforting to see. I know one of our big complaints about the Cube Pro when it came out was that the slicer didn't feel complete. It didn't feel flexible enough.
There's holes.
Yeah, and it also didn't seem like they were releasing updates frequently enough. Now that's definitely changed. The release schedule has changed quite a bit for the Cube Pro in the last, I'd say, 6 months. I mean, we're seeing releases as frequently as every other week. And he was even talking while we were at the show that there's a feature that they're going to be releasing in the next 1 to 2 weeks that allows for 100% infill printing.
True, 100% is what he said.
Because right now, even if you try and set the infill density to the max on the Cube Pro, it only does about 80 to 90% infill. It just won't, there's nothing you can do that I'm aware of. There's nothing that you can do to make it 100% solid. You can't, it's not like you can set the infill to 100%. But it was, I mean, he's a very, very scientific. He has a very scientific way of looking at it.
Yeah, so very engineering based.
So, I mean, he was talking about how they're going to use a different infill pattern to make sure that it cools, that the parts cool down a certain way to make sure that it's as solid as possible, so that everything is melting to everything else.
Then you know, we've seen this with some materials that we use is, all right, if you print a really small part, it prints really well, but then you go larger and all of a sudden now the slicer has to either handle it a different way because it's a larger part, or it handles it the same and you get a really crappy looking part.
Yeah.
So it's things like that, algorithms that you don't always think about behind the scenes that need to happen to make a really, really nice looking part.
Yeah. There were a couple other things in the 3D Systems booth. There was something about 3D printing gaming pieces, or like little gaming sculptures in full color.
There's fashion.
There's like a little fashion section. Then there was another part about the medical side of things, like where, I mean, this is the part that I don't fully understand about 3D Systems, but they had like medical simulation tools where basically you put on a VR set and then it's like you had fake surgical tools in your hands and you were trying to.
Yeah, but they actually had a real video going, and I wasn't too not impressed, but it was unsettling to watch some of the video they had.
But then again, it's stuff that's not for us, which.
No, it was just like the video. It's like, oh, there could have been like a little bit of like having that TV turned away from the aisle so people walking didn't have to see that medical stuff going on.
Yeah, I don't know. It was 3D Systems also had their big direct metal printer there, like their metal one.
Yeah, so let's talk about that next. So their metal stuff. So yeah, it was kind of out of place.
In a big, I mean, it's a big machine.
Well, yeah, it's the size of a walk-in cooler or like an ice house for those up north. For those down south, maybe a sauna.
Yeah, no, I mean that's.
I don't know. Or is that a northern thing?
I don't know.
Anyway, it was huge, and why? Why at CES? It's a consumer electronics show. It's not an industrial. I mean, that would have been something that would have been better fit at like a Rapid.
Yeah, it felt like it was filler, to be honest. I mean,
it was a filler.
It was a big filler, and then they also had one of their nylon sintering machines.
Well, then they had one of their SLAs, DMP.
Yeah, then they had their ProJet 9000, I think. Like their big. It just fell out of place.
Yeah, I don't know why.
That's all we really have to say about it. So other companies that had large printers there. So Stratasys had a booth.
Stratasys did have a booth. And MakerBot was actually latched onto them a little bit.
Yeah.
So MakerBot didn't have a very big presence at this show.
It was basically a table with a Replicator 5th Gen and a Z18. With the Z18 on the cart off to the side. And I mean, they just aren't launching a big product this year. I mean, what they're launching is important, but I don't know. I think part of it is with this last year, they're trying to really be conscious of where they're spending their money. But let's dive into the Smart Extruder Plus.
Yeah.
So the Smart Extruder Plus, huge improvement over the standard Smart Extruder. So the Smart Extruder is one of the things that could have been much better executed when the 5th Gen launched. It got much better towards the end of the standard Smart Extruder life cycle. They revised it. They made some firmware and software updates that really improved the performance. But the Smart Extruder Plus addresses a lot of the things from a hardware side. So starting with I guess from the bottom up, they've changed the heater cartridge a bit so it has better thermal management. What that's going to mean is less heat traveling to where it's not supposed to be. So less heat creep, less plastic melting in places where it isn't able to be remelted. What we found is whenever a smart extruder did jam up, it almost always jammed up towards the top of the thermal barrier tube. And you can't really heat that up unless you apply external heat like a blowtorch or something. We don't recommend that. Or just letting the printer sit there and wait for the heat to soak all the way up and wait for the plastic to soften. That is time consuming. It's really not ideal. Another thing that they've done is they've extended the PTFE, so the Teflon tube, all the way up to where the drive gear is at. One of the other places that we saw that partially melted plastic getting stuck was in between the drive gear and the metal thermal barrier tube. And when it's there, there's nothing that can be done. You can't push it out from the top. It can't be heated from the bottom. It would end up in a jammed print. One of the other things that there were a lot of issues with was the smart extruder detecting a false filament jam. So one of the great things about the smart extruder is it will detect when it's out of filament, and it will detect if there's a filament jam. The way it detects if there's a filament jam is if this little rotary encoder wheel here, so the filament goes from the top down past a rotary encoder wheel, it just spins as the filament's going past. But if the filament was going past it, but it was slipping against that rotary encoder wheel, that wheel wouldn't spin. So when that wheel's not spinning, the printer thinks there's a jam because the motor's driving, but there's no filament moving, or at least it doesn't think there's any filament moving. So MakerBot now has an overmolded part, so it has more of a rubberized texture on it with a groove, so it'll grip the filament better. So much less chance of that filament going by and not being properly detected. They've also changed a couple other things in how well the smart extruder stays attached to the printer. They've extended the pins that communicate from the smart extruder to the chassis of the printer. So even if the smart extruder comes off a little bit, it'll still maintain a connection without throwing an error. But it will be much less likely for the smart extruder to accidentally come off because they're using stronger magnets to hold the smart extruder to the chassis. They're also doing some different things on the firmware and software side of things to just make the smart extruder function better. Some of the things that they're changing in the firmware, but also on the hardware side of things, are going to enable the printer to start printing faster. So as the print is slicing, you'll be able to have the smart extruder heating up and start the homing process. Since it's a more reliable homing process, that homing process will take less time. So you'll be able to go from desktop software to printing in a much shorter amount of time than with the standard smart extruder. So that was all on the MakerBot side of things. Also in the Stratasys booth, they had some stuff. They had and Eric, correct me on the terminology, but a penny board, like a little small skateboard.
Size of a penny board, maybe like 20 inches long.
Okay.
Small.
And this was printed on, I think it was one of the objet printers, so a PolyJet printer. And it was printed using their toughest material, and you're able to stand on it and ride it, as well as you could ride it on carpet. So, you were able to, I don't want to say you kind of kicked the crap out of it, because you didn't, but it held up to actually being stood on, and you were working on flipping it.
I was afraid that he was going to break an ankle and we were going to have to take him to the hospital. But that's just me, because I don't skateboard, so.
Yeah, if we would have been on a hard surface, I think it would have worked out a lot better, but for being on carpet, you were doing a pretty good job with it. I don't know, was there anything else in the Stratasys booth that we...
Not really. They were kind of tucked back in the corner. They didn't have, even Stratasys with MakerBot didn't have as large of a booth as 3D Systems. So, and again, we weren't really sure why they went with such a big booth. Maybe they're locked into it, but Stratasys and MakerBot definitely were cutting back this year. Next year, if they do have a next product announcement next year, I do expect them to have as large booth as 3D Systems with a wall of machines like Robo 3D. I expect that, but we'll see how 2016 goes and what kind of they announce as the year goes on and kind of see where they're at in 2016. Anything else with Stratasys and MakerBot before we move on to some other cool stuff that we saw?
No, I think that was about it.
Well, with the Smart Extruder Plus, what's the current deal that's going on with the $99?
Okay, so for current customers that already own a MakerBot 5th Gen printer, so this is the Replicator Mini, the Replicator 5th Gen, or the Z18, through, I believe it's February 23rd, you can go to the MakerBot website enter your serial number to confirm that, okay, you have it, or you have it, and then you can get the Smart Extruder for $99 versus the normal price, which is $199. This deal also is extended to people that are buying a new system. So for the time being, the new systems are still going to be shipping with the old Smart Extruder, and then we highly recommend that you go with the Smart Extruder Plus as that $99 upgrade. So that $99 upgrade, if you are doing a new purchase, that doesn't have an end date. The only end date is if you currently own a 5th gen system and you want to upgrade to the new Smart Extruder. We highly, highly recommend it. They've doubled the warranty on the Smart Extruder. I mean, they have over 160,000 hours of testing, cumulatively with the Smart Extruders printed.
We printed with it.
Yeah, and I mean, and keep in mind, we're not working with the most current version of the firmware. We're not working with the most current version of the software, just because they haven't released it as of this podcast, and we're still getting. I mean, yeah, Jake was holding us up. This is really untouched.
Beautiful.
Great prints, much better quality printing than we were seeing before. We haven't had a single jam yet. We're at about. Well, I haven't checked what we're at now, but I'd say we're well over 100 hours on our Smart Extruder Plus, and we haven't had a single issue. I mean, absolutely nothing. So we're feeling very, very good about it. I think that's it for the Smart Extruder.
Cool. So the next booth we talked with was Emcore 3D. Now they do a lot of paper stuff. They got their paper printer, which it's a really nice looking machine.
You don't get too excited about it.
I don't, because I'm just like, yes, and they're always like, well, look at this, you can use these as functional parts. Yeah, but I don't get excited, like John said.
See, I do get excited about that.
It has a place in the industry,
yeah.
And it does really nice color parts. So I mean, if you're in the market for like a CJP machine, this would be something that would be comparable, in my opinion.
Yeah. So before,
except for some weird overhangs.
Yeah. So it just can't handle the same sort of overhang detail that a CJP machine can handle, because CJP, you've got that powder base, so it's easier to shake out infill. Now with the Emcore printer, since it's paper, I mean, once it's glued together, it's almost like it's wood. It's really difficult to dig out of overhangs if you have a really intricate part. So if you have that part where it's that ball bearing where it's a large ball bearing, you're not able to do that kind of stuff with the Emcore. But it's very good at doing full color prints. And when it's all glued together, it is a very strong part. I mean, you can take it and use it as a hammer. I mean, it'll break before a real hammer would, of course. But so they had the Emcore Iris, but the price point was like $40,000, $50,000. The Emcore Iris was their original printer. So so there are universities that would have these, that sort of thing. But I think they only had around 300 of them in the United States total. And they're usually at higher
compared to a MakerBot, which probably has what, 80,000 units in the last 6 years?
Yeah,
7 years?
Yeah. Total, I'd say it's around 80,000 units. Now, with the Emcore Arc, the price point is going to be around $9,000, about $10,000 turnkey. Having it installed. It's going to be more user-friendly, easier to use. It has a smaller overall footprint than the Emcore Iris does. It has a slightly smaller build volume. But what they're saying is it's a lot easier to print your part in sections and then glue it together. Because it's paper, there's really very little shrinkage. You don't need to worry about warping or curling. So you can print something in segments and glue it together afterwards and have a really nice looking print. I think availability, they're saying Q1 for people that are pre-ordering now, and then they're going to do that first production run. So if you don't pre-order, it's probably going to be Q3 before you'd get one. So I think they're going to sell quite a few more of these. The price point is low. The cost of materials is way, 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 way lower than...
Because it actually does the ink on the outside. It doesn't do it across the whole layer.
Right, and it's paper. So instead of using... how the Emcore Iris worked is it used individual sheets of paper and it would slide them down. What the Emcore Arc does is it uses a giant roll of paper. Think an old microline printer, the really noisy ones.
The ones you see at like Napa and O'Reilly.
Yeah, so it works like that. And it's just a continuous roll. And because it uses that, because it has those perforations on the sides where basically the drive pegs go, it has finer control over where the paper is at. So it actually creates a higher resolution, more accurate print than the Iris did. I was a little surprised that they were offering something that's that much better at a lower price point, but I think they're really trying to get market penetration now. They just realized if they don't do something have a lower price point, they're not gonna
survive.
Yeah, or they would be a very niche product. They wouldn't be a general use printer.
Exactly.
Yeah. So I mean, it's
a nice looking machine.
Yeah,
I mean, they got
a printer to use for everything.
They got different skins for it, which I think is cool. I guess.
Yeah, I think they're going.
I'm not excited.
I think they're going after like the product design, almost marketing type people, where you're trying to pitch an idea for a product and really, take it to a test group and see, okay, do you like the look of
ergonomics? I
this?
think was one of the parts that they had there. They had like a mouse with different designs, and then, how you go to Walmart and you have like the same mouse with different flower patterns or different architect patterns or whatever you want to call it. They actually had a couple models of those sitting in one of their showcase pieces where
Shoes too.
the shoes, yeah.
I think one of the other items was like a Coke can, and that was to show off that you can still have the legible text on the side of the can, so it's able to do that kind of detail.
So it really competes with the CJP machine from my
that's-
side of the table.
I mean, that's what it's really up against.
So, yeah, it's a neat machine. It was cool to see it actually working. And I think they had half a dozen of them sitting in there.
Yeah.
I think you said. So it was interesting. They had a very large booth as well. The next one we're gonna kind of cover here was New Matter, and this one was really interesting. What they have is they have two different drive gears on the bottom, and then the build plate rides on those.
Yeah, it's like a rack and pinion system.
Yeah, so it's really interesting because we've never seen one do that before, and I think they have a patent on it, or a patent pending, one of the two.
And they were there last year just with a little 10-foot, no, I think they had a 20 by 10-foot booth.
I don't remember.
They were much smaller last year than this year. And
they had a really nice booth.
Yeah.
They actually had a really, really well put together
very
booth.
clean, very clean,
very
very
Apple-esque. It looked like you're walking into an Apple store kind of deal,
Yep.
and looking at their products. Their machines were running. I don't know if you have any input on that, but
print quality was looking great, especially for the price point. It's $399 for the printer. I think you do have to. They recommend that you use their software, but it just runs off standard G code. So if you wanted to use Simplify 3D or Slicer or Cura, you could. Yeah, I mean it's a nice looking machine.
Yeah, and it's all enclosed, so you don't get kids' fingers in there touching stuff and in the gears. But I was just really intrigued about how they were actually moving the build plate, because I've never seen that with a 3D printer yet. So New Pro 3D. So you talked to this guy for quite a while.
Yeah.
I was kind of wandering around the floor.
We got pretty deep into the weeds on some of the science behind how their printer works. So a lot of you will be familiar with the Carbon 3D printer. Their print technology is called Clip. So the way that the Carbon 3D printer works is it uses an oxygen permeable layer of glass, and then it has all the resin on top. And the way that most SLA printers work is you have a projector down below.
So like your Formlabs.
You have a projector down below, or you have a UV laser down below. You have your build plate, and then it traces the light or projects the light. Then that plastic hardens, but then to get more liquid resin, so more fresh resin underneath, you need to lift it up so it delaminates, or it's called the peeling process. And then it goes back down, and then you have the light projected or traced again. What Clip does with Carbon 3D is, instead of having that peeling process, which takes a lot of time, it's a lot of mechanical movement, it has that oxygen permeable glass, and when the oxygen is in that resin, it doesn't allow it to cure. So you have this buffer area where you always have fresh resin coming in. So your print is continuously being drawn up out of the resin, and your only limit there is how quickly the resin hardens based on how much light is being shown to it. Now the limit to that is the way the glass is oxygen permeable is millions of tiny little tubes that are only wide enough to allow oxygen to go through, but not wide enough to allow the resin to drip out. Now, I think they're saying that the largest piece of oxygen permeable glass that there is 4 by 6 inches right now. It's very expensive to manufacture, especially to manufacture reliably. Now, the new Pro 3D is using something else to create that buffer zone. He said that's that's the proprietary patent pending stuff. Well, it's not technically patent pending. We've gotten to provisional patents a little bit, but it has a provisional patent right now, and it allows it to draw that part up very quickly. Now, the great thing is you're not limited by size, because it's not limited by that panel of glass at the bottom or panel of whatever it is at the bottom. So you're able to do large, very large parts and do them very quickly. He said that right now they're not interested in commercializing the technology themselves. They just love doing the research side of things.
Oh, they're a research lab.
Yeah. So that's what they do is they research stuff, and then they hope to find someone to sell the research to, and then someone that has experience making 3D printers.
It's kind of like what
that
colleges
commercialize
do.
it. Yeah.
It's what a lot of colleges look to do.
Yep. So they have research, they create the IP, and then they hope that someone buys the IP from them. And that's how a lot of research colleges, that's part of how they fund themselves to continue doing new research. I'm trying to think. We talked for quite a while about a bunch of different stuff. But
Well, and we'll have an interview about it.
yeah, the interview will be up. We really launched right into it. It didn't have a nice intro. We just kind of, I said, hey, can we do an interview? And then he just started explaining stuff. And it's like, okay, Eric, start filming. John, okay, I've got the audio on. All right, microphone. Let me just get the microphone in his face so we start recording this. So they had a unit there running and printing, and it was printing as fast as they were claiming it was printing. And it was in a big, I thought it was a very large printer until he opened it up, and yeah, it was a server rack. And the reason they used a server rack was so that they could have the printer, like the print bed part, mounted on top at eye level, and then they just had a DLP projector down below. And
You get a lot of good airflow through there to cool that projector off.
It was just an off-the-shelf projector. There was nothing special that had been done to it. It sounds like their secret sauce is how they keep that buffer layer from hardening when the UV light hits it. He said that they went from deciding to go to CES on December 20th to being at CES on, what was that, the 4th?
Yeah.
Yeah, and so they built everything, they sourced everything that they needed and had it up and running that quickly. So that was phenomenal.
It was working.
Yeah.
So, you talk about, we only got a couple more points here, but you were talking about, kind of the setup of doing the interview. So Eric and Little Eric, who I've called now as Little Eric, made a bunch of different my phone keeps dropping out of my lap. Watch out.
Don't you have pockets?
Yeah, but the phone's like the size of a dictionary. So what they designed was, so this is, what do you call this, Eric?
GorillaPod?
Sure. I'm not a camera person. I've never used this stuff before. But anyway, so it just slides right in so that you could actually attach this. So like this one went on one of your backpacks, so that you could actually attach it on your backpack and then have one resting, and then I think there's one up top. So we got a picture, and so that was the kind of the cool thing that you guys worked on before we left.
Yeah, because this is to replace what piece of much more expensive equipment?
It was kind of like a shoulder mount.
Shoulder mount Steadicam.
That's $30.
This.
And,
Well, yeah.
Yeah. Instead of spending hundreds of dollars on.
So
A DJI makes good products, but
You pay for it.
they're professional.
Yeah.
And then we got a spacer for the monitor that he used. So just cool things that you can make with 3D printing. This was in our in the beer filament. So it's just cool stuff that you can make with 3D printing.
Yeah, functional stuff.
Functional.
Otherwise it would have been duct tape.
Yeah.
Trying to hold everything
Or
together, which is
hundreds and hundreds of dollars.
Yeah, duct tape would have worked, but it's kind of a use once type of deal.
And it looks nice. That's the other thing, is it looks nice, it looks professional. So that's kind of a use case that we've kind of seen besides the jig and fixtures and some of the spare parts you guys have been purchasing. You'll notice that some of the components actually come in 3D printed cases and boxes for shipping, so that they don't get damaged or scratched. So off of that, we got Polaroid announced their own 3D printer.
So
this is an interesting one. So we walk up. So they're not even in the 3D printing section to begin with. They're over in Tech East, which is kind of like your automobiles, your gamers, your
TVs, like all your.
They were next to Canon.
Yeah.
Is what their booth was. So they announced their printer. The printer itself, it's not.
I like the look of it from the outside.
It's a little retro looking, but it has its own personality.
Yeah.
It has a personality to it. The downside, downside.
There is more than one.
We'll just start with this one, is the filament. They must have said copy paste from 3D Systems cartridge system and did it, but made it more expensive with less material. Because I think they're at like a 600 gram spool for $100.
So that's exactly what the Cube Pro is.
Or, excuse me. No, they're a little bit cheaper. I take that back. They're
700 grams?
$750 for $100.
Oh.
But still, it's a proprietary cartridge system that, and I don't think we got into talking how much the actual printer was.
I think it was in that $2,000 price point.
Yeah, maybe. I don't remember.
Yeah.
But it was interesting to see why would you go with that cartridge system. And you look at the inside of the printer. There's a couple pictures online, and we'll share a couple. Like the carriage looks very beefy and clunky and awkward. It's just big pieces of aluminum that's machined out to have a bearing in it. And then the drive mechanism is weird. It looks like it could have dual extrusion, but they changed the orientation of the drive mechanism inwards, so the fans...
For the filament drive.
Yeah, for the filament drive, so that the fans, instead of like sitting out towards you like a Replicator 2X, they're towards each other, but they don't have a second one.
Yeah.
So it's weird.
And I mean, a lot of this stuff could be forgiven if the prints looked good, but I mean, for a finished product, these are some of the worst prints that we've seen off of a printer. I mean, at least the Cube Pro, yeah, it's expensive. Yeah, the cartridges are proprietary, but the prints look good.
Yeah. So I don't know what's going on.
Well,
and like even their carriage top plate, I don't know if they were in a rush to get this out there where it's just a 3D printed piece on top. It's not even machined aluminum or injection molded plastic.
I mean, I can basically tell you what happened with this. Polaroid, as the company it used to be, doesn't really exist anymore. They went through bankruptcy. So right now, they basically just put their name on anything that they think can make money. Someone higher up said, hey, 3D printing's big. We should have a 3D printer. And so lo and behold, 3D printer. Oh, well, we aren't going to make much money on the hardware. We need to try and make money on the materials. All right, that's where your chipped filament came in. Now, the reason they weren't in the 3D printing section is because there aren't a ton of Best Buy and Walmart and Target executives that go through the 3D printing section. There's a lot more of them go through. There's a lot more of them that go through TechEast.
Well, I saw a couple Best Buy execs going through, but that's beside the point.
It's a different kind of buyer that ends up going through there.
Yeah.
And so people are going to end up buying the Polaroid 3D printer based on the name Polaroid, not based on the quality or anything like that. And what's going to happen? They're going to get their 3D printer set up, and I think they're going to be disappointed with their print quality. And unfortunately, that likely means they're going to be turned off of 3D printing, saying this doesn't work. Why would I ever use this? It's expensive to 3D print stuff. I mean, which is really unfortunate. I mean, I understand why they did it. I know how they're thinking, but it's just that.
Do more research.
It's not going to work. It just felt kind of tone deaf.
Yeah.
I don't know.
It's like they tried, and they're just coming out with a different Cube Pro.
Yeah.
I mean, there's things that they could maybe salvage to make this a good machine, but they're going to need to interact with somebody in the 3D printing realm to really understand how to make that a good machine.
Yeah.
That's kind of where my standpoint is you know, they need to get somebody in there or have contact with somebody that knows what's going on to help them kind of position that product if they want to succeed in the 3D printing realm. And the first thing is to get rid of proprietary cartridge filament. It's just how our industry works.
Yeah. Anything else, really?
Not on the 3D printing side. Well, actually, so we kind of broke down exciting printers that we saw. ProJet, Emcore, and the new Pro were the top three that we thought were pretty cool at this show. Nothing that was overpowering or like, oh my God, this is so amazing, but these were some really, really interesting machines.
Because I mean, really, the 3D printing side in general, there wasn't anything breakthrough. There wasn't anything revolutionary. It was just a lot of continuous improvement. Really seeing these different companies maturing. So I mean, the reason we picked the ones we did is because it's stuff that we had either been eagerly anticipating or something that we hadn't seen coming at all.
And the coolest booth that we picked, we have four of them. The one that takes it home is Robo3D with their track, their wall of printers, their new machine.
Oh yeah, they had a 3D printed
Mini arcade.
Yeah. So like playing Pac-Man.
Oh yeah, I was playing Mario for a while. They actually had a mascot walking around, so that was kind of neat.
That was. I've never seen a 3D printing company with the mascot.
Bobby, the multiple print things.
Yeah, so they had their mascot in 3D printed as multiple components.
And what was cool with that is they crowdsourced a lot of that. So they talked to their customers and said, hey, we're trying to make this really cool, large 3D printed robot for CES. Do you want to help? So there are different users around the world, each printed a section or a block of the robot, and it all came together and created a much larger piece.
So it was really cool. So they took that home as far as the coolest booth that we saw. Following that was New Matter, Formlabs, and 3D Systems, just because they had a lot of different technologies in the booth, and it was just a big booth too. Very clean. Now, kind of the other stuff outside of 3D printing, we're gonna just touch on that very briefly. They had a manned, or like not a manned, but you could sit in this quadcopter. That was, don't you remember that from
I might have
Techies?
missed that.
Well, you were probably sitting in the massage chair.
Probably, yeah.
You waited like half an hour to sit in a massage
Yeah,
chair?
it was like 20 minutes. Worth it.
But so they had like a manned quadcopter. Some of the other cool stuff that we saw, I mean, a lot of Chinese manufacturers out there at this trade show.
Yeah, last year we didn't have the same amount of time we did this year to go exploring. Man, there's like, how many different companies selling USB cords are there?
There will never be a shortage of USB cords at gas stations.
Bluetooth headphones. Yeah, no, it was pretty crazy. I think the most interesting thing I saw, because I'm an AV guy, was a lot of 4K TVs, especially the OLED TVs, just really nice contrasting colors. And then we have that with high dynamic range. I mean, video stuff is looking really awesome.
One of the other things that I thought was cool that we'll talk maybe in part 2 of this, because there's a couple things that we didn't really touch on, was there's a PCB 3D printer that was like $200K dollar amount wise, but it had some really cool things from Israel. So that's one that we should talk about. And I know we need to talk about the big box and the Raise 3D. We didn't touch on that at all. So we'll have maybe a part 2 of this CES and really kind of dive into some of those other ones we didn't get to. And then John, you have some swag that we have now.
So this has been much requested. By the time this podcast goes up, we will have Fargo 3D printing shirts available on our website. I think we have extra small through extra large, or small through extra large, something like that. Really comfortable shirts. I don't know, they fit great. $15, and then you can be rocking the Fargo 3D printing logo wherever you go. Yeah, it's and I think for everyone that purchases a T-shirt, if you haven't already gotten one, there's going to be the Fargo 3D printing decal sticker in there.
Yes.
So throw it on your 3D printer, take a picture of it with or just mentioning Fargo 3D printing, and we should be able to hook you up with some other stuff too. So
yeah.
Long awaited. But yeah, so like Jake mentioned, there'll be a part 2 coming. I don't know when that'll happen, but there's just too much stuff to cover in one podcast. On behalf of myself, John Schneider, Jake Clark, we want to thank you for watching. Hope you catch the next podcast. And we'll also be doing all the uploads for all the interviews. So it's going to be a time-consuming process. Eric and Sarah are going to be very busy.
If you have questions about CES, put those in the comments so that we can catch those in the next ones.
Right.
When we do the next podcast.
Yeah, and if you haven't already, subscribe down below. Like us on the various social media channels we're on. If it's a social media channel, we're probably on it. Fargo 3D Printing. So again, on behalf of both of us, thanks for watching.
Bye-bye.
Yeah, this is me talking. These are the levels that I'll be using when I'm talking. Unless I get really excited about something, which you never know.
Oh my God. You're breaking the fourth wall.
Yeah.
You
guys are talking to me not half the time. You're like, oh, and then there.
Yeah, I know.
Get the footage right.
We need backup. We in focus?
Yes.
Are we ready?
We're good.
Okay. Ready?
Yeah.